Have you ever felt like the world is moving too fast? Like every moment is filled with noise, expectations, and demands pulling you in different directions? The pressure to keep up, to be constantly connected, to seek validation from others, it's overwhelming, isn't it? In this modern, hyper-connected world, we are rarely alone. And yet, despite being surrounded by people, many of us feel more disconnected than ever. What if I told you that the very thing we fear, being alone, is actually the key to success, wisdom, and true fulfillment? History has shown us that the greatest minds, the most revolutionary thinkers, and the most enlightened beings all had one thing in common: they embraced solitude. Think about it: Buddha, Einstein, Steve Jobs, Leonardo da Vinci, Nikola Tesla, Virginia Woolf, and countless others. What made them different? Was it talent? Privilege? Luck? No. It was their ability to step away from the distractions of the world, retreat into solitude, and cultivate deep wisdom. But here's the problem: society has conditioned us to fear solitude. We are told that being alone is a weakness, that solitude is loneliness, that success comes from constant networking, socializing, and being out there in the world. But Buddhism teaches something radically different. In Buddhism, solitude is not isolation, it is a path to enlightenment. It is in solitude that we discover who we truly are, free from the expectations and opinions of others. It is in solitude that we find clarity, creativity, and deep inner peace. So let me ask you, how often do you take time to be truly alone? Not just physically, but mentally and emotionally? How often do you sit in silence, free from distractions, just to listen to your own thoughts? If the answer is rarely or never, you're not alone. Most people actively avoid solitude because they are afraid of what they might discover. But what if solitude isn't something to be feared, but something to be embraced? What if the moments of stillness, the quiet spaces between the chaos, are actually the most powerful moments of all? This video is not just about solitude, it's about transformation. Stay with me as I reveal 10 profound Buddhist teachings that prove solitude is not a curse but the ultimate tool for self-mastery. If you have ever felt lost, overwhelmed, or unsure of your path, this may be the breakthrough you've been waiting for. Are you ready to challenge everything you thought you knew about solitude? Let's begin. Number 1. Embrace solitude for self-discovery. In a world filled with constant distractions, noise, and obligations, solitude is often misunderstood. Many associate being alone with loneliness, assuming that it is a state of deprivation. However, solitude, when embraced with the right mindset, is an opportunity, one that allows us to reconnect with our true selves. It is in these quiet moments that we gain the rare chance to examine our inner world without external influence. Buddhism teaches that self-discovery is not something we find in the approval of others but in our own reflection. When we step away from the expectations imposed by society, we begin to understand what we truly desire, what our strengths and weaknesses are, and what ultimately gives our life meaning. The Buddha once said, "You, yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." This means that before we seek love, understanding, or validation from others, we must first cultivate it within ourselves. One of the most effective ways to reconnect with our inner self is through meditation and mindfulness. Meditation allows us to observe our thoughts without judgment and recognize patterns that we may have never noticed before. Many of our struggles stem not from external circumstances but from how we react to them. When we sit in stillness and truly listen to our thoughts, we often uncover deep-seated fears, unresolved emotions, and limiting beliefs that have shaped our actions for years. Consider the story of Tenzin, a young monk who struggled with self-doubt. He constantly compared himself to others, questioning whether he was good enough, whether he was making progress, and whether he was on the right path. His teacher, noticing this internal turmoil, instructed him to spend a full year alone in a cave, meditating. At first, Tenzin resisted. How could solitude help him when his doubts were so overwhelming? But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, something incredible happened. Without external validation or comparison, he was forced to face his fears head-on. He began to realize that his doubts were mere illusions, created by his own mind. By the time he returned to the monastery, he was transformed. His confidence was no longer dependent on how others perceived him but was instead rooted in his own self-awareness. Tenzin's journey is a powerful example of what solitude can offer. It forces us to confront our inner dialogue, the voice that either lifts us up or tears us down. When we allow ourselves to sit with our thoughts without distraction, we gain clarity. We begin to differentiate between what is real and what is simply a projection of our fears. This is why Buddhist monks often seek solitude. It is not to escape life but to understand it more deeply. If you are new to embracing solitude, start small. Take just 10 minutes a day to sit in silence, away from social media, away from notifications, and away from distractions. Breathe deeply and allow your thoughts to surface. This simple practice can become a gateway to deeper self-awareness, helping you reconnect with your true self in ways you never imagined. Number 2. Solitude helps you focus on what truly matters. Once we begin to understand ourselves through solitude, we realize another profound truth. The world is full of distractions pulling us away from what truly matters. Every day, we are bombarded by obligations, social expectations, and an endless stream of information. Social media, advertisements, and the opinions of others create a mental noise that drowns out our own thoughts. We often find ourselves chasing goals that were never truly ours, ones that were imposed by society, family, or peer pressure. Solitude gives us the space to step back and reassess our priorities. It allows us to ask the crucial question, am I living a life that aligns with my true purpose? Many people go through life on autopilot, following the paths laid out for them without questioning if those paths are truly fulfilling. But when we are alone, without external distractions, we gain clarity on what really matters. This is why Buddhist monks practice solitude, not as a means of escaping life, but as a way to return to it with renewed clarity. One of the most profound examples of this is the Buddha himself. Born into royalty, he had access to every luxury imaginable. He was surrounded by pleasure, power, and influence, yet something inside him felt incomplete. He realized that despite all his material wealth, he lacked true understanding. So, he made the bold decision to leave everything behind and embark on a solitary journey into the forest. For years, the Buddha lived in solitude, meditating and seeking wisdom. It was only through solitude that he discovered the truth about suffering and the path to inner peace. Had he remained in the palace, surrounded by distractions and worldly attachments, he might have never achieved enlightenment. His story teaches us that clarity doesn't come from more noise, more input, or more external validation. It comes from stillness. Imagine what could happen if you spent just one weekend alone without distractions. No phone, no social media, no external noise, just you, your thoughts, and the opportunity to reflect. Most people fear being alone because they are afraid of what they might discover. But that fear is exactly why solitude is so powerful. It forces us to confront what we've been avoiding. In today's world, we often glorify busyness as a measure of success. But the truth is, being constantly busy doesn't mean you are making progress. In fact, it can mean the opposite. You might be running in circles, chasing things that don't truly matter. Solitude gives us a moment to pause and ask, Is this truly the direction I want to go? One way to implement this lesson is to schedule intentional solitude into your daily life. Set aside time each week to disconnect from external distractions and reflect. Journaling, silent walks in nature, or simply sitting alone in a quiet room can be powerful practices that help realign you with your purpose. When we embrace solitude with intention, we gain clarity, focus, and direction. We begin to see through the distractions and recognize what truly brings meaning to our lives. Just as the Buddha found enlightenment in solitude, we too can uncover our own truth, if we are willing to embrace the silence. Number 3. Creativity flourishes in solitude. History has repeatedly shown us that solitude is not a void but a fertile ground for creativity. Some of the most groundbreaking discoveries, inventions, and artistic masterpieces were born in moments of deep, uninterrupted thought, far away from distractions and societal pressures. The reason solitude is so closely tied to creativity is simple. When we are alone, our minds are free to wander, to make unexpected connections, and to explore new possibilities without external noise clouding our vision. Think about some of the world's greatest minds, scientists, artists, writers, and innovators. What did they all have in common? They actively sought solitude as a way to unlock their creative potential. Leonardo da Vinci would spend hours alone, sketching and contemplating the intricate details of nature. Isaac Newton formulated the laws of gravity not in a crowded university but during his solitary retreat in the countryside when the Great Plague forced him into isolation. Virginia Woolf, Henry David Thoreau, and Nikola Tesla all credited their best ideas to long periods of uninterrupted solitude. One of the most famous examples of solitude-driven creativity is Albert Einstein. His groundbreaking discoveries, including the theory of relativity, were not developed in noisy academic settings but in quiet, deep thinking sessions where he would isolate himself and ponder the mysteries of the universe. His famous thought experiments, such as imagining what it would be like to travel at the speed of light, were only possible because he allowed his mind to roam freely without distractions. Einstein once remarked, "The monotony and solitude of a quiet life stimulates the creative mind." His words reflect a truth that has been echoed across centuries. When we create space for stillness, we also create space for genius. Why does solitude fuel creativity? The answer lies in how our brains work. When we are constantly surrounded by people, conversations, and digital noise, our brains are in reactive mode, constantly responding to stimuli. However, when we are alone, we enter a reflective mode, where our brains can engage in deep thinking, imagination, and problem solving. This is where true innovation happens. Scientific studies on creativity have shown that the brain's default mode network, DMN, responsible for daydreaming, self-reflection, and idea generation, is most active when we are in solitude. But solitude does not mean isolation. In Buddhism, retreating into silence is not about escaping the world but about returning to it with fresh insight. Many Zen monks practice silent meditation retreats, where they spend days or even weeks alone in nature, contemplating the nature of existence. They do this not just for spiritual enlightenment but because silence allows for deep creative and intellectual breakthroughs. If you want to cultivate creativity in your own life, start with a solitude walk. Leave your phone behind, step outside, and simply observe the world. Notice the shapes of the trees, the patterns in the clouds, the sounds of nature. Let your mind wander. The greatest ideas often emerge when we give ourselves the permission to simply exist in stillness. Many writers and artists take long walks alone as a form of meditation, allowing their subconscious mind to generate new ideas. Another powerful practice is journaling in solitude. Find a quiet space, open a notebook, and let your thoughts flow freely. Write without judgment, without structure, just let your mind spill onto the page. This practice has helped countless creative minds unlock breakthroughs they never would have discovered in the chaos of everyday life. Solitude does not just make us more creative, it makes us more original. When we are constantly surrounded by others, we absorb their ideas, opinions, and biases, often without realizing it. But when we spend time alone, we begin to develop ideas that are uniquely our own. This is why some of the most revolutionary thinkers in history, Buddha, Socrates, Nietzsche, and Einstein, valued solitude as a tool for independent thought. In a world that glorifies constant connectivity, choosing solitude may seem counterintuitive. But creativity does not thrive in noise, it thrives in silence. The next time you feel stuck in a creative rut, step away from distractions, find a quiet place, and allow yourself to think, to dream, and to create. Number 4. Solitude teaches you to be self-reliant. The ability to be alone without feeling lonely is one of the most powerful skills a person can cultivate. In a world where we are taught to seek companionship, external validation, and approval, self-reliance is often overlooked. Yet, true strength comes from within, not from dependence on others. Buddhism teaches that contentment is not something we find outside of ourselves, it is something we cultivate internally. Many people fear solitude because they associate it with loneliness. But loneliness is not simply the absence of people, it is the absence of connection, particularly with oneself. There are many who are surrounded by people every day yet feel deeply alone, while others live in solitude and feel profoundly fulfilled. The difference is that those who embrace solitude learn to find happiness from within, rather than depending on others for emotional fulfillment. There is an old Buddhist story that beautifully illustrates this point, the hermit and the king. One day, a powerful king heard of a hermit who lived alone in the forest, spending his days in meditation and contemplation. Curious, the king traveled to meet him and asked, "Why do you live alone in the wilderness? Don't you feel lonely?" The hermit smiled and replied, "I am never alone, for I have my thoughts, my wisdom, and the vast sky as my companion." The king was puzzled. He had everything, wealth, power, an entire kingdom at his feet, yet he often felt empty and restless. Meanwhile, this simple hermit, with nothing but the clothes on his back, seemed to radiate peace and contentment. The lesson is clear: happiness is not found in external attachments, it is cultivated within. The strongest people in history were those who learned to be at peace in their own company. They did not rely on others to define their worth or to make them feel complete. Instead, they found inner strength, wisdom, and contentment within themselves. Think about the most resilient people throughout history: Buddha, Jesus, Gandhi, Marcus Aurelius. What did they all have in common? They spent time in solitude, developing self-reliance before stepping into the world as leaders and teachers. They did not seek external validation because they had already validated themselves. So how can we cultivate self-reliance in our own lives? The first step is to spend intentional time alone. Instead of filling every moment with distractions, social media, conversations, entertainment, allow yourself to sit with your thoughts. If the idea of being alone makes you uncomfortable, that is even more reason to embrace it. Discomfort is the doorway to growth. Another powerful practice is to take responsibility for your own happiness. Many people fall into the trap of believing that their happiness depends on others, on a romantic partner, friends, or external circumstances. But this is an illusion. Happiness is an inside job. When you become emotionally self-sufficient, you free yourself from disappointment, because you no longer rely on external factors to feel complete. In Buddhism, the concept of non-attachment is central to self-reliance. It teaches that suffering arises when we cling too tightly to things, whether it's relationships, material possessions, or social status. When we cultivate detachment, we become more resilient. We learn to appreciate what we have without depending on it. The strongest people are those who can stand alone. They are not afraid of solitude because they understand its power. They know that in silence, they can hear their own wisdom more clearly. They know that in stillness, they find strength. And they know that true freedom comes not from needing others, but from knowing they can thrive on their own. Number 5, mindfulness and self-reflection in solitude. Solitude offers the rare opportunity to turn inward and truly listen to our inner voice. In the modern world, we are constantly bombarded with external stimuli, notifications, conversations, social expectations, all of which pull us away from ourselves. When we remove these distractions, we can finally hear what our minds and hearts are trying to tell us. This process of deep introspection is essential for personal growth, and Buddhism teaches that the key to unlocking its full potential lies in mindfulness. Mindfulness is the practice of being fully present in a moment, without judgment. It is about observing reality as it is, rather than as we wish it to be. In solitude, mindfulness allows us to sit with our thoughts, emotions, and experiences without distraction. Instead of reacting impulsively to every thought that arises, we observe them with detachment, like watching clouds drifting across the sky. This simple but profound practice helps us identify patterns in our thinking. We begin to notice recurring worries, fears, or desires that influence our behavior. For example, if someone constantly feels anxious when alone, mindfulness can help them recognize that this anxiety often stems from a fear of being disconnected, rather than an actual threat. By simply observing this fear without resisting it, they can begin to release its hold on them. Buddhism encourages self-reflection as a path to wisdom. The Buddha himself spent years in solitude, meditating and reflecting on the nature of suffering. He understood that self-awareness is the foundation for transformation. If we do not take the time to reflect on our thoughts and behaviors, we risk repeating the same mistakes over and over again. However, when we cultivate self-awareness through mindfulness, we gain the ability to make conscious choices rather than acting out of habit. A powerful exercise for practicing mindfulness in solitude is silent sitting. Find a quiet place where you won't be disturbed. Sit comfortably, close your eyes, and focus on your breath. As thoughts arise, do not judge them, simply acknowledge them and let them pass. If you notice that your mind keeps returning to a specific worry or memory, observe it without trying to suppress it. This practice trains the mind to become an observer rather than a participant in the endless stream of thoughts. The result of this practice is profound. Over time, you will begin to recognize the hidden patterns in your thinking. You may notice that you constantly criticize yourself, seek external validation, or cling to past regrets. These insights can be life-changing, as they allow you to break free from negative mental cycles and develop a deeper sense of inner peace. Mindfulness in solitude is not just about self-reflection, it is also about cultivating a state of deep awareness and clarity. When we slow down and pay attention to the present moment, we experience life more fully. A simple walk in nature can become an opportunity to truly see, hear, and feel the world around us. A moment of stillness can reveal insights we might have otherwise overlooked. By incorporating mindfulness into solitude, we develop a powerful inner stability, one that allows us to navigate life's challenges with greater wisdom and resilience. We no longer feel the need to constantly seek distractions or external validation because we have cultivated an inner sanctuary of peace. Number 6. Solitude builds inner strength. Life's most difficult battles are often fought alone. When faced with challenges, uncertainty, or loss, we realize that no one else can walk our path for us. In these moments, our strength is not measured by how many people support us, but by how deeply we can rely on ourselves. Buddhism teaches that true strength does not come from external power, but from inner mastery. It is not about controlling the world around us but about learning to control our own minds. Solitude plays a crucial role in this process, as it forces us to develop resilience, patience, and mental discipline. The greatest warriors in history understood the value of solitude. The samurai, for example, trained in isolation before battle. They practiced swordsmanship, meditation, and breathing techniques to sharpen their minds and bodies. By spending time alone, they learned to control their fears, silence their doubts, and develop an unshakable inner strength. A samurai who could not find peace in solitude was considered weak, for they would be easily broken in the chaos of battle. This lesson applies to modern life as well. Whether in business, relationships, or personal challenges, those who rely on external validation often struggle to stand firm in adversity. But those who have built inner strength through solitude are not easily shaken. They do not crumble when faced with criticism or setbacks because their confidence comes from within, not from the opinions of others. One way to cultivate this strength is by embracing discomfort. Solitude can be uncomfortable at first, especially for those who are used to constant social interaction. But discomfort is the training ground for resilience. When we intentionally step into solitude, we learn to face our fears rather than escape them. For example, imagine someone who struggles with self-doubt. They constantly seek reassurance from others, afraid of making decisions on their own. If this person begins to practice solitude, spending time alone, journaling, reflecting, they will gradually build confidence in their own judgment. They will no longer need external approval because they have developed an internal foundation of self-trust. Another key aspect of inner strength is mental discipline. When we are constantly surrounded by distractions, it is easy to lose focus and succumb to emotional impulses. But solitude teaches us to master our minds. It trains us to remain calm in the face of uncertainty, to think clearly under pressure, and to endure hardship without being overwhelmed. Consider a time in your life when you overcame a challenge alone. Maybe it was a period of transition, loss, or personal growth. Reflect on how that experience shaped you. Did it make you stronger? Did it teach you resilience? Often, the greatest transformations happen when we are left to face our struggles alone. In Buddhism, there is a concept known as anti-fragility, the idea that true strength is not about avoiding hardship but about growing stronger because of it. This is why monks undergo long periods of solitary retreat. They are not escaping life but preparing themselves to meet it with unbreakable resilience. One of the most effective ways to build inner strength in solitude is through intentional challenge. This can take many forms. 1. Fasting for a day to develop self-control. 2. Spending an entire weekend without technology to break the addiction to constant stimulation. 3. Practicing silent meditation for an hour to train the mind to be still. Each of these practices strengthens the mind's ability to endure discomfort without resistance. Over time, they build an inner stability that remains unshaken, no matter what life throws our way. The world tells us that strength comes from external power, money, influence, social status. But Buddhism teaches that true strength comes from inner mastery, the ability to remain calm, centered, and unshaken in the face of chaos. Solitude is the forge where this inner strength is developed. It is where we learn to trust ourselves, master our thoughts, and embrace challenges as opportunities for growth. Those who fear solitude are often those who fear facing themselves. But those who embrace it discover a wellspring of resilience, confidence, and inner power. The question is, are you willing to step into solitude and discover just how strong you truly are? Number 7. Overcoming fear of loneliness. One of the biggest misconceptions about solitude is that it is the same as loneliness. But in reality, solitude and loneliness are two entirely different experiences. Loneliness is a feeling of disconnection, a longing for companionship that stems from a sense of emotional emptiness. It often arises when we feel misunderstood, neglected, or dependent on external validation. Solitude, on the other hand, is a conscious choice, an opportunity to connect with yourself rather than feeling abandoned by others. Buddhism teaches that suffering arises from attachment, the belief that our happiness depends on things outside of ourselves. Many people fear being alone because they have unknowingly attached their sense of worth to external relationships, social status, or the opinions of others. When these external factors are removed, they feel lost, as if they have no identity outside of them. But the truth is, solitude is not about losing yourself, it is about discovering who you are without external influences. To overcome the fear of loneliness, the first step is to reframe how you perceive time alone. Instead of seeing it as a punishment, start viewing it as an essential form of self-care. Society has conditioned us to believe that being alone is undesirable, but some of the most fulfilled individuals throughout history, Buddha, Jesus, Leonardo da Vinci, and countless philosophers, embraced solitude as a tool for self-discovery and wisdom. They were not afraid of being alone because they understood that their greatest insights, creativity, and inner peace emerged in solitude. A practical way to shift your mindset about solitude is to engage in self-reflection through journaling. Writing down your thoughts allows you to see your emotions more clearly, helping you recognize patterns in your fears, anxieties, and desires. Often, people avoid solitude because they are afraid of what they might discover about themselves. But self-awareness is the first step to self-growth. By keeping a journal, you gain insight into your true feelings rather than suppressing them through constant social distractions. Another way to overcome loneliness is by developing a stronger relationship with yourself. When you spend time alone doing things you enjoy, reading, hiking, cooking, or simply meditating, you begin to realize that you are your own best companion. Instead of relying on external validation for happiness, you cultivate inner fulfillment. The more comfortable you become with your own company, the less dependent you become on others for emotional support. A simple but powerful challenge is to spend one meal alone without any distractions. No phone, no television, no music, just you and your thoughts. At first, this may feel uncomfortable, but over time, it becomes a meditative practice. You learn to appreciate your own presence, to listen to your thoughts, and to embrace solitude as a form of nourishment rather than deprivation. As you develop comfort with solitude, you will begin to notice a shift. What once felt like loneliness will start to feel like freedom. Instead of fearing time alone, you will start to crave it as a means of restoring your energy and clarity. And most importantly, you will realize that true connection comes not from being surrounded by people but from being deeply connected to yourself. Number 8. Solitude enhances decision-making. In a world filled with constant noise, opinions from friends, the media, social media, and cultural expectations, it is easy to lose sight of what truly matters. Most people go through life making reactive choices, influenced by external factors rather than their own intuition. But solitude provides something incredibly rare in today's world, the space to think clearly and make intentional decisions. When we are constantly surrounded by people and distractions, our decision-making process becomes clouded by outside influences. We may feel pressure to conform to societal expectations, to seek approval, or to make choices that align with what others think is best for us. But when we step into solitude, we remove these external pressures and gain the clarity needed to make decisions that align with our true values and desires. One of the greatest examples of this is Steve Jobs. Known for his innovative vision and unconventional thinking, Jobs understood the power of solitude in making big decisions. He would often take long solo walks, without a phone, without distractions, simply allowing his mind to process ideas. Some of Apple's most revolutionary decisions were shaped during these solitary walks, where he could reflect deeply without outside noise influencing him. His ability to think independently and make bold decisions was largely due to his comfort with solitude. Buddhism teaches that clarity arises from stillness. When the mind is quiet, we can see things as they truly are, rather than through the lens of fear, doubt, or external expectations. Meditation is a prime example of this. By sitting in silence, we develop the ability to observe our thoughts without immediately reacting to them. This ability is crucial in decision-making because it allows us to approach problems with wisdom rather than impulsiveness. If you struggle with making clear decisions, try this simple but effective practice. Before making any major decision, spend 1 hour alone in complete silence. No distractions, no external input, just you, your thoughts, and your intuition. During this time, reflect on the decision objectively. Ask yourself, 1. Am I making this choice because it aligns with my values, or because I feel pressure to? 2. If no one else's opinion mattered, what decision would I make? 3. Will this choice bring me long-term fulfillment, or is it just a temporary escape? By taking the time to sit in solitude before making a decision, you give yourself the chance to access your inner wisdom. This simple habit can prevent countless regrets and lead to choices that are more aligned with your authentic self. Another benefit of solitude in decision-making is that it strengthens self-trust. Many people doubt themselves because they are used to seeking approval before making choices. But when you consistently practice making decisions in solitude, you build confidence in your own judgment. You no longer feel the need to ask 10 different people for their opinions before deciding. You trust yourself to make the right call. Some of the most successful individuals in history have understood the importance of solitude in decision-making. From Buddha meditating under the Bodhi tree to Warren Buffett reading alone for hours each day, these figures recognized that wisdom comes from deep contemplation, not from external noise. If you want to improve your decision-making, start incorporating moments of solitude into your daily life. Instead of making choices impulsively, step back and give yourself the gift of silent reflection. Over time, you will develop a sharper intuition, greater confidence, and the ability to make decisions that truly serve your highest purpose. Number 9. Solitude as a gateway to enlightenment. Throughout history, every great Buddhist master has recognized the profound power of solitude. It is not merely a break from society or an escape from responsibilities. It is a necessary path toward deeper self-awareness, wisdom, and ultimately, enlightenment. Solitude is where spiritual transformation takes place. It is where distractions fade, illusions dissolve, and the truth of existence becomes clear. The Buddha himself exemplified this. Before he attained enlightenment, he spent years in complete isolation, meditating under the Bodhi tree. It was in solitude that he confronted the nature of suffering, impermanence, and the true self. Had he remained in the distractions of the palace, surrounded by material wealth and external influences, he might never have realized the Four Noble Truths, the very foundation of Buddhism. His solitude was not a rejection of the world but a means of understanding it more deeply. Why does solitude have such a profound effect on spiritual growth? The answer lies in the way the mind functions. When we are constantly surrounded by people, conversations, and obligations, our attention is pulled in multiple directions. Our thoughts are fragmented, and our awareness is clouded. But when we step away from the noise and embrace solitude, we enter a state of deep contemplation, one where we can observe our minds without interference. This is why Buddhist monks practice silent retreats, often going into solitude for weeks, months, or even years. They understand that true wisdom cannot be found in books or teachings alone. It must be experienced directly through inner stillness. In solitude, the layers of ego begin to dissolve. The mind, once restless and reactive, becomes clear. The illusions that create suffering, attachment, desire, fear, start to lose their power. Even outside of Buddhism, many spiritual traditions emphasize the role of solitude and enlightenment. Jesus fasted alone in the desert for 40 days. The Prophet Muhammad meditated in the cave of Hira before receiving divine revelation. Hindu yogis retreat into the mountains for deep meditation. Across cultures and religions, solitude has always been the gateway to profound spiritual realization. But solitude does not have to mean living in a cave or retreating into the mountains. Even 5 minutes of silence daily can transform your life. The key is to use this time for genuine self-inquiry. Sit in a quiet place, close your eyes, and simply observe your thoughts. Ask yourself, who am I beyond my name, my roles, my possessions? What remains when all external identities are stripped away? This type of contemplation, done consistently, can lead to powerful insights. Another way to deepen your spiritual practice through solitude is by practicing mindful presence. Instead of constantly seeking distractions, whether through social media, conversations, or entertainment, choose to be fully present with yourself. Notice your breath, the sensations in your body, the emotions that arise. This simple act of awareness reconnects you with the present moment, the only place where true peace and clarity exist. For those who struggle with solitude, start small. Take a solitary walk in nature without a phone, without music, without distractions. Simply observe the world around you. Feel the wind, listen to the sounds, and notice how your mind gradually shifts into a more meditative state. This is how solitude becomes a practice of enlightenment, not as a means of escaping life, but as a way of seeing it with greater clarity. True enlightenment is not about acquiring more knowledge or seeking external validation. It is about realizing that everything you seek, peace, wisdom, freedom, already exists within you. Solitude is the doorway to this realization. The question is, are you willing to step through it? Number 10. The greatest gift of solitude, freedom. At its core, solitude grants one of the most powerful gifts a human being can receive, freedom. Not just physical freedom, but the ultimate form of freedom, freedom from societal expectations, external validation, and the illusions that keep us trapped in cycles of suffering. We live in a world where people are conditioned to seek approval. From a young age, we are taught that our worth is determined by how others perceive us, our success, our status, our relationships. We become so entangled in these external measures of value that we forget what truly matters. But solitude liberates us from these illusions. When you master solitude, you become unshakable. You no longer make decisions based on fear of judgment. You do not seek external validation to feel worthy. You do not shape your identity based on societal expectations. Instead, you discover an internal strength that no amount of praise or criticism can influence. This is why some of the greatest leaders, thinkers, and philosophers have spent significant time in solitude. Marcus Aurelius, Thoreau, Nietzsche, and countless others found clarity in isolation. They understood that to truly know oneself, one must first disconnect from the noise of the world. Buddhism teaches that attachment is the root of suffering. This includes attachment to external approval, material possessions, and the desire to fit in. When you cultivate solitude, you begin to release these attachments. You realize that your happiness is not dependent on others, it is entirely within your control. This realization is true freedom. Think about the moments in life when you felt most at peace. Were they the moments when you were constantly seeking validation? Or were they the moments when you felt completely at ease in your own presence, with no need to prove anything to anyone? Freedom through solitude does not mean detaching from the world permanently. It means that when you engage with the world, you do so from a place of authenticity rather than obligation. You are not controlled by societal pressures. You choose your path based on what aligns with your values, not what others expect of you. To cultivate this sense of freedom, start by asking yourself, what external expectations am I still attached to? Do you seek approval from parents, friends, colleagues? Do you fear being judged for making unconventional choices? By identifying these attachments, you can begin the process of letting them go. One of the most powerful exercises to embrace this freedom is practicing radical self-acceptance in solitude. Spend time alone, without distractions, and observe your thoughts. Instead of seeking to change yourself to fit external expectations, ask, who am I when no one is watching? This question leads to one of the most liberating realizations, that your true self has always been enough. Solitude gives you the space to create a life that is aligned with your deepest values. It allows you to build confidence, make decisions from a place of clarity, and live without fear of judgment. It is the path to inner liberation. The ultimate power of solitude is that it frees you from the illusion that you need anything outside of yourself to be complete. When you master this, you become unstoppable. You are no longer controlled by fear, validation, or expectations. You move through life with a sense of purpose and peace that is unshaken by external circumstances. So, what's one step you can take today to embrace solitude? How can you use it not as an escape, but as a tool for true freedom? The answer to these questions lies not in the opinions of others, but in the silence you are willing to embrace. Now that you've seen the power of solitude, the question is, what will you do with it? Will you continue to see solitude as something to avoid, or will you start embracing it as a tool for transformation? The truth is, the greatest breakthroughs, whether in personal growth, creativity, or spiritual awakening, happen in solitude. When the noise fades, when the world's expectations are stripped away, what remains is the essence of who you truly are. We've explored how solitude fuels creativity, enhances decision-making, builds resilience, and leads to enlightenment. We've seen how the greatest minds in history used solitude to change the world. But at the core of it all, solitude offers one ultimate gift: freedom. Freedom from external expectations. Freedom from distractions. Freedom to define your own path, without the influence of society telling you who you should be. So, what's one step you can take today to embrace solitude? It doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be as simple as 1. Spending 10 minutes in silence every morning before you check your phone. 2. Taking a solitary walk without music, just observing your thoughts. 3. Journaling your thoughts to understand your mind better. 4. Meditating for a few minutes to reconnect with yourself. The key is to start. To create small moments of solitude in your life and watch how they transform you. Remember this, solitude is not loneliness. It is not isolation. It is not a punishment. It is a gateway to wisdom, strength, and self-discovery. If this message resonates with you, if you are ready to harness the power of solitude, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. What's your experience with solitude? How has it changed you? Let's start a conversation. And most importantly, take action. Because the journey to your greatest self begins not in the noise of the world, but in the silence within.